Older kids who disowned me over a decade ago. Wants to reconnect, but I moved on already. I married young, fresh out of high school, swept up by what felt like true love. We were young, impulsive, and ready to take on the world together. By the time I was 25, we had 3 kids: Jason, Emily, and little Sarah. We built a life that on the surface looked picture perfect, but underneath, the cracks were starting to show, exacerbated by hidden resentments and my then wife's growing distance. When our oldest Jason was 10, my wife started having an affair. The unraveling of our marriage was swift and brutal, culminating in a separation that left deep scars, especially since we decided to keep the real reason hidden from the kids. They didn't know why we divorced, only that soon after, their mother and I lived separate lives. This secrecy bred resentment, and as the years passed, it seemed they blamed me exclusively. The relationship with my kids deteriorated as they grew older. Each birthday, each holiday, felt more strained than the last. I watched helplessly as the distance grew, feeling more like a wallet than a father. Whenever I reached out, tried to explain or show affection, it was met with cold indifference or outright hostility, often encouraged by their mother's subtle insinuations about my character and intentions. Then came the lowest point of my life, an overdose attempt that landed me in the hospital. It was a wake-up call, a realization of how far I had fallen. My boss, a steadfast friend, offered me a lifeline, a job across the country. Desperate for a change, I took it. It was a chance to escape, to build something new without the shadows of my past constantly hovering over me. In this new city, life slowly began to piece itself back together. I met Anna, a woman with a gentle strength that seemed to see right through the facade I had built around my old wounds. She was patient, loving, and most importantly, she offered a new perspective on life, one rooted in understanding and recovery. With her help, I battled out of the severe depression that had gripped me for years. 10 years passed in this new life, and I was happy, genuinely happy. Anna and I had 2 wonderful children, and I had all but severed ties with my past, including telling my mother to stop updating me about my estranged children. However, the facade of this newly found peace was shattered when I received an unexpected invitation to my middle daughter Emily's wedding. The invite, surprisingly forwarded by my mother despite my requests, sent me spiraling. I didn't attend, couldn't face that part of my past. The decision was painful, laden with what-ifs and could-have-beens. It was a stark reminder of the bridges I had burned and the emotional toll of my decisions. The years continued to roll by, each one distancing me further from my previous life, until one unsuspecting evening, my phone rang. A familiar area code flashed across the screen. Without thinking, I answered, only to hear a voice softly say, "Dad?" Panic seized me, and I blurted out, "Sorry, you must have the wrong number," before hastily hanging up. They tried to call back several times, but I blocked the number, convinced it was Emily, or perhaps Sarah, trying to reach out. The fear of reopening old wounds, of confronting the past I had worked so hard to move beyond, was overwhelming. I found myself shaken, the old anxieties and fears creeping back in. Now, as I recount this tale, I wrestle with mixed emotions. Am I justified in wanting to keep these doors closed to protect the life I've rebuilt, or am I simply running from my responsibilities, my past? The thought of facing my children now, after all these years, brings a turmoil that I thought I had long overcome. Am I an a-hole for turning away from them, or is this just a necessary measure to maintain my sanity? This narrative isn't just about the mistakes of the past or the attempts at redemption. It's about the ongoing struggle between duty and self-preservation, the constant balancing act of dealing with consequences that time does not heal. Now, for 2 top comments before reading the update. I mean, it sounds that tracks just feed a lot of lies to them, so they thought that it was because you had an affair. But I guess they now know the truth, thus trying to reach out to you, not the a-hole. And if I were you, I would try to talk to them and see what they wanted, so don't be afraid, call them. Talk to them and tell them the truth. This is the way to move on. Email. Then everything is in writing. You can take your time to digest and respond. Not the a-hole. If and only if Opie wants to hear why they called, email is the best. If they want to apologize for how they treated him, they shouldn't expect his answer. Email is the best if talking to them will bring strong flashbacks. Email is the best, but he absolutely doesn't have to talk to them when they were degrading him when Opie did. All of them were adults, and any adults know that there are 2 sides of every story. They were victims of excessive whites, but they became boys and abusers themselves. Driving someone to self-harm takes a lot of effort. He owes nothing to them. He owes the be irresponsible parents and partner to his minor kids and his wife, and if letting them back into his life could cause some mental crises again, it is just irresponsible to let it happen. If one or more of your kids wanted to apologize to you and establish a relationship, would you be open to it? Is there room for healing? If so, is there anyone who could be the go-between on your behalf and see what they wanted? Parental alienation is a form of brainwashing, so their behavior, which you never deserved, would have stemmed from that. Your children also don't deserve this brainwashing. I fully understand why you would not want to open that door again. If one or more of your kids is seeing things more clearly now, the potential for healing could be huge. The choice is yours, and you are not the a-hole, regardless of which choice you make. This is a great perspective. My mother-in-law brainwashed my husband and his sister against their father. They haven't talked to that man in 40 years. He wasn't a father of the year, but he wasn't a monster either. This happened to me with my older son. I miss him. But to him, I'm a monster. Your children are also old enough now to know the truth. Your ex-wife has done the maximum amount of damage that can possibly be done. What are you achieving by protecting her? Tell them and get it off your chest. Then move on. They can decide if they want to believe you or not, and whether or not they want to be in your life. Keep in mind the same manipulative cow that did this to you is the person raising your children. They probably have a better idea of who she is and what she is capable of. Then you might realize by the time my youngest was 17, all of his kids, 4 adults or thereabouts, after years of abuse and hatred, he is happy. Leave him in peace. Now for the update. Update 1. First up, I got a call that really threw me for a loop. It was from my uncle, telling me it was my oldest daughter trying to get back in touch. That was a lot to process, especially with everything else that's been going on. As you can imagine, reading through all your comments and advice has been overwhelming but also super helpful. I appreciate everyone weighing in with their perspectives. I've taken a significant step for my own mental health. I reached out to my therapist, who thankfully had an opening this Monday. I've already called my boss to take the day off because I really need to focus on this. The plan is to jot down everything I can think of that's been troubling me, and then discuss it all with my therapist. My wife will be there too, to help sort through it all. We're thinking of tackling this via email for now because waiting around for calls just adds to the stress. One of my biggest worries in all this is my kids. I really don't want them to start forming a relationship with someone who might just disappoint them or, worse, hurt them in some way. It's something I need to talk through with my therapist. I want to make sure I handle this delicately and correctly, not just for my sake, but for theirs too. Honestly, that's about it for updates at the moment. I've gained so many different perspectives from all of you, and while it's been incredibly helpful, it's also a bit much to take in all at once. I think this is going to be a slow and careful process. I'm still not even sure why she's trying to get in touch now, after all this time. I did make a temporary decision to edit and block that number, just long enough to tell her I'd send an email address where she can reach me later. Even doing that was tough. My wife actually had to type out the message for me. I noticed some of you were worried I might be using drugs or something, but just to clear up any misunderstandings, the only time I ever took anything was that one desperate moment years ago, trying to cope with everything. And I haven't moved on from our last communication until now, when my youngest is 19 and my oldest is 24, 2 years since we last spoke. I hope that clears up any confusion or concerns you might have had. Thanks again for all the support and advice. I'll keep you updated, but like I said, this is going to be a slow process. I need to take things one step at a time, carefully and thoughtfully, to ensure the best outcome for everyone involved, especially my kids. Now for 2 top comments before reading the update. Comment 1. If one or more of your kids wanted to apologize to you and establish a relationship, would you be open to it? Is there room for healing? If so, is there anyone who could be the go-between on your behalf and see what they wanted? Parental alienation is a form of brainwashing, so their behavior, which you never deserved, could have stemmed from that. Your children also didn't deserve this brainwashing. I fully understand why you would not want to open that door again. If one or more of your kids is seeing things more clearly now, the potential for healing could be huge. The choice is yours, and you are NTA regardless of which choice you make. Comment 2. This is a great perspective. My mill brainwashed my husband and his sister against their father. They haven't talked to that man in 40 years. He wasn't father of the year, but he wasn't a monster either. Comment 3. Well, got my son's mother pregnant just out of high school at 18. Her 20, tons of cheating. Her, almost went to jail twice for her embezzling from where she worked. Put the money in my bank account. I tried to change who and how I was, not a very good person, but knew I needed to be better for a lot of reasons. Tons of other things to mention, but I digress. His mom would call and say he wanted to see me, so I would drop everything and spend time with him. Things were very standoffish from him, because of course he wasn't around me all the time and only knew of me from what his mom had told him. He would ask questions and I would answer them if I could. Some were about things his mom said. If it wasn't true, I would just say, I remember things differently and leave it at that. Back to mom, when things ended with us, I had found out she had a threesome and I went to her house late at night. Did something I shouldn't have. Not hands people. But I told her, when he turned 18, I was going to tell him everything that went on and he would know the truth. As he got older, he would call, we'd talk and stuff, then he was able to drive. So we'd spend time together talking about the past. Him getting to know more about me, and me know more about him. At that time, my wife and I had just had our daughter, N, had even talked about him moving in with us. His suggestion. Moving ahead, he went to college, dropped out. His mom called me multiple times to call N talk sense into him, ironically, but to no avail. He then goes into the Navy, we stay in touch, he's on leave at base and collapses. Apparently his pre-workout drink messed his heart up. He had to take leave for 6 months to recover. Same as college. Didn't do shit to stay in shape for PT test to get cleared and was kicked out. I moved during this time as he was stationed on the East Coast. I would ask to spend time with him and he didn't want me to come there. Okay. He kept going back home, FL, about once a month to see his mom. I'd gotten to the point and asked him to come and see us, 5 HR ride from where he was, versus FL. Said maybe, okay, let it ride. Then before Christmas as we were talking, I had picked up on things he was saying, and asked him later when he was getting married, and he laughed it off, and said they weren't that far in the relationship for that. I had said a number of times before that when he got married that I couldn't see it in person, but it was what it was. A week later, my wife shows me the FB post of him getting married. That's when I cut him off. Period. I had opened myself and my family to him, and he lied about it. It wasn't a small lie, and I had always told him not to lie to me, as I would be the last one to ever judge him or anybody. He lied. He tried calling 2, 3 more times, but I never answered him or text back when he texted. I will never speak to him again. Not a chance. Ever. Many more things happened along the way. Too much to put in here. But I fought to be a part of his life as much as I was allowed. That was the end of all of it. 8 years ago. Update 2. Starting off, after sending that cautious email to my daughter about possibly reconnecting, she replied quicker than I thought she would. In her email, she dropped a huge piece of news. She's expecting a child. Yeah, I'm going to be a grandfather. That part of the news had a strange effect on me. It was like a mix of shock, joy, and a dozen other emotions I can't neatly package into words. She wrote about wanting her child to know their grandfather, to have me in their life in a meaningful way. It was a lot to take in, considering our strained past and the long stretch of silence that had defined our relationship until recently. The thought of being a granddad is exciting, but also scary, given how things have been between us. Then, there's the situation with my son, which is a whole different kind of heavy. I found out from a rather unexpected source, my brother, who's been somewhat of a mediator in the shadows, that my son has been battling drug addiction. He's currently in rehab, trying to put his life back together, and he's reaching out because he wants to mend fences. Finding out about his struggles, and knowing he's in a place where he wants to heal, brought up a lot of emotions, from relief to sorrow to guilt for not being there when maybe I could have helped. Navigating how to support him through this, even from a distance, has been challenging. I've started writing him letters. It's an old school approach, but it feels right. It gives me time to think about what I want to say without getting overwhelmed by the immediacy of a conversation. Amid all this, another layer of complexity got added to the mix. My ex-wife, the same woman who played a pivotal role in the estrangement from my children, is now seriously ill. She's reached out, wanting to talk, to explain things, maybe to apologize. I'm not sure. It's a lot to process. The woman who caused so much pain in my life is now facing her own profound struggles, and she wants to reconnect, maybe to find some peace for herself. So I'm caught between old anger and the natural human feeling of sympathy for someone who's unwell. It's a strange place to be. Part of me wants to have that confrontation, to tell her about all the pain she's caused, to make her understand the depth of it. But then there's another part that questions what good that would do. Would it change anything? Would it make me feel better? Or would it just reopen old wounds that have taken so long to heal? Deciding to meet my daughter was the first step in this new chapter. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, a neutral place where we could talk openly. That meeting was intense. There were tears, raised voices at times, but also moments of genuine connection that I hadn't felt in years. We talked about the past, about her childhood, about the divorce, and how things went so wrong between us. It was clear that there were misunderstandings and hurt feelings on both sides. We also talked about her future, about her pregnancy, what she envisioned for her child. It's clear she wants to do things differently, wants to break the cycle of estrangement and pain that marked our family for so long. It's a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility, but also a chance for something new, something better. As for my son, the letter writing has been therapeutic for both of us, I think. He's shared some of his journey through recovery, the ups and downs, the setbacks and victories. It's given me insight into his struggles and a new perspective on what he's been through. It's also shown me how much I missed, how much I didn't see, and how maybe things could have been different if we'd managed to keep the lines of communication open. Now, regarding my ex-wife, I'm still undecided. I haven't responded to her yet. It's a decision I'm wrestling with daily. I find myself asking whether I'm ready to face her, whether I can handle whatever she has to say, whether it's worth the emotional toll it might take. In all of this, the support from Anna, my wife, has been my rock. She's been incredibly supportive, helping me navigate these complex emotions and decisions. We've spent many nights talking it through, weighing the pros and cons, trying to figure out the best path forward, not just for me, but for our family as a whole. The impact of all this on my mental health hasn't been small. There are days I feel overwhelmed, unsure if I'm making the right choices, if I'm handling things the best I can. But I'm trying to take it one day at a time, to process each piece of information, each emotion as it comes, and to make decisions that are thoughtful and considerate, not just reactive. Reflecting on all of this, it's clear that this journey of reconciliation and healing is going to be long and complicated. There are no easy answers, no quick fixes. It's going to require patience, understanding, and a lot of hard conversations. But I'm hopeful. Hopeful that out of all this pain and complexity, something good can emerge, something lasting. Thanks for sticking with me through this long update. Your words of encouragement and advice have meant the world to me. I'll keep you posted on how things progress, on the ups and downs, and on the lessons learned along the way. Here's to hoping for more ups than downs in the days to come. Update 3. Hey everyone, your insights and encouragement have been a beacon during these tumultuous times, so thanks for that. So let's dive into what's been happening. After much internal debate and several sleepless nights, I decided to meet with my ex-wife. It was not a decision I took lightly, considering all the water under the bridge and the storms we've weathered, both separately and together. We met at a quiet cafe, a place neutral enough to not stir too many memories. Seeing her after all these years, visibly weakened by her illness, was a shock to the system. She spoke a lot, mostly apologies, expressing regrets about her past actions and the destructive path she led us down. She tried to explain her reasons, mostly rooted in her own insecurities and failures. I listened more than I talked. A part of me was processing the pain, while another part was oddly detached, trying to find some semblance of understanding in her words. It was an emotionally draining meeting, and I left feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Forgiveness hasn't come fully yet, but I'm on the path to understanding, and maybe that's a start. On a brighter note, the relationship with my daughter has taken a positive turn. She's nearing her due date, and the anticipation of welcoming a new life has somehow brought us closer. We've spent weekends picking out baby stuff, setting up the nursery, and just talking, really talking, about our lives, hopes, and fears. It's been a healing process, repairing old wounds with new memories. This experience has given us a project to focus on together, and it's more than just preparing for a baby. It's about laying down the foundation for a new phase in our relationship. My son's journey has been equally heartening. His completion of the rehab program marked a significant milestone, and the man he's becoming fills me with pride. We've been meeting up regularly, taking it slow, allowing ourselves the space to explore this new dynamic. He's been joining family dinners, and seeing him interact with his siblings has been reassuring. There's an awkwardness, sure, but beneath that, there's a genuine effort on all sides to connect, which is more than I could have hoped for. Anna, my incredible wife, has been nothing short of amazing through all of this. Her support isn't just in the big gestures, but also in the quiet moments when I've needed it most. Her growing relationship with my children from my previous marriage is developing at its own pace. It's cautious, yet there's a mutual respect that I believe can blossom into something meaningful with time. She's been involved in every step, helping navigate the complexities of blending two families, always with a grace that amazes me. One of the unexpected joys has been the interest from my younger kids in getting to know their older half-siblings. They ask questions, show a keenness to connect, and have brought a lightness to family gatherings that might otherwise have been tense. These interactions, though still in their early stages, hold a promise of a blended family that not only coexists, but supports one another. Mentally, I'm in a much better place. Regular therapy has been transformative, providing me not just with coping mechanisms, but also with insights into my own behaviors and fears. Learning to forgive others has been challenging, but learning to forgive myself has been another journey altogether. Each session, each conversation helps peel back layers of guilt and regret, replacing them with something a little more like hope. Looking ahead, there's still a lot of road to travel. Relationships are complex beasts, and they require constant nurturing. The work isn't easy, and there are days when the old fears and doubts creep back in, whispering that it's all going to fall apart again. But then I look at how far we've come, how far I've come, and I find the strength to keep going, to keep trying, to keep building. The excitement of becoming a grandfather is something I'm looking forward to with a mix of joy and nerves. It represents a new chapter, not just for my daughter, but for me as well. It's a chance to experience the joys of young life again, through a lens of wisdom gained from many hard-learned lessons. It's also a reminder of the cycles of life, of how we get chances for redemption in ways we might not expect. In this update, I wanted to convey not just the changes and challenges, but also the quiet victories and the soft moments of realization that come unexpectedly. Whether it's a smile across the dinner table or a successful conversation that ends with a hug instead of a hurried goodbye, these are the moments that stitch the fabric of our newly reconstructed family tighter together. Thanks for walking this path with me, for your stories and advice, for your tough questions and kind words. I'll keep sharing as this journey unfolds, through the ups and downs, the setbacks and successes. Here's to more ups than downs, to more healing than hurt, and to finding peace in the chaos of change. Cheers to what comes next, and may it bring more light than shadows. Last update. First things first, I became a grandfather. My daughter gave birth to a beautiful baby girl a few weeks ago, and I was there in the hospital, holding her hand through it all. It was an incredibly emotional experience, seeing new life come into the world and knowing this little one is part of my family. Holding my granddaughter for the first time was a moment of pure joy, mixed with a deep sense of gratitude for the repaired bonds that made this moment possible. My daughter and I have come so far, and though it's been a bumpy road, it feels like we're finally on solid ground. My son is continuing to do well in his sobriety journey. We meet regularly and our relationship is stronger than ever. He started a new job, and seeing him take these steps towards building a stable life for himself is incredibly rewarding. We talk about everything now. No topic is off limits, which has brought a new level of trust and openness between us. As for my ex-wife, our last conversation was probably our last. We reached a sort of peace, an understanding that while the past can't be changed, it doesn't have to dictate our futures. I've let go of a lot of the anger and bitterness that I held on to for so long, and it's been liberating. This doesn't mean I've forgotten, but rather, I've chosen to focus on the present and the future instead. Anna, as always, has been my cornerstone throughout all of this. Her unwavering support and love have made all the difference. She's embraced my children and granddaughter as her own, and her capacity for kindness and compassion seems boundless. We've grown closer through these experiences, navigating each challenge and celebrating every victory together. The younger kids are thrilled to have a new cousin, and they're already proving to be doting siblings. Integrating my family has had its challenges, but these moments of joy and unity remind me why it's been worth all the effort. In terms of personal growth, this journey has taught me more about myself than I ever expected. I've learned the true value of forgiveness, the strength required to rebuild trust, and the power of letting go of past hurts. Therapy has been a crucial part of this process, giving me the tools to deal with my emotions healthily and constructively. Looking back, if someone told me a few years ago that I would be where I am now, I would have been skeptical, to say the least. But life has a way of surprising us, of throwing us into the deep end and giving us the chance to swim. I've learned that it's not just about surviving the storm, but also about learning how to dance in the rain, to embrace each challenge and find the lessons it holds. As I close this chapter, I'm not just saying goodbye to the past, but also looking forward to the future with a hopeful heart. I plan to spend more time with my family, to cherish every moment with my granddaughter, and to continue building those bonds that we've worked so hard to strengthen. Thank you all for your support, your advice, and your kind words throughout this journey. Your comments have been a source of comfort and wisdom, helping guide me through some of the toughest times. While this is my last update, I'm excited about what's next, and I'm ready to embrace whatever comes with open arms. Here's to new beginnings, to family, to love, and to life. May we all find peace and happiness on our paths. Cheers to the road ahead, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of my journey. This story is titled, After Losing My Parents, My Brothers Left Me in Foster Care. 10 years later, they want my help. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, takes only a second, and helps me bring you even more awesome content like this. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, when I was 10, my mom passed away. It was sudden, and there wasn't much time to process what was happening. One day she was there, and the next, she wasn't. It was a car accident. I remember sitting in the waiting room at the hospital while the nurses spoke in hushed tones. My brothers, Kevin and David, were both there, but they didn't seem as shaken as I was. Maybe it was because they were older, or maybe it was because they had already started pulling away from our family by then. Kevin was 23 and busy with his new job, and David, at 19, was starting college. I was just a kid, and suddenly everything I knew about stability and family was gone. At the funeral, I expected my brothers to step up. I mean, they were adults. Kevin had his own apartment, and David was sharing a dorm with a couple of friends. I figured one of them would take me in, or at least offer to. But instead, I overheard them talking about arrangements. That's how I learned I wasn't going to stay with either of them. The social worker who showed up the next week confirmed it. She was nice enough, but all I could focus on was the fact that my brothers didn't want me. They gave excuses, of course. Kevin said he wasn't ready to be a full-time guardian. David claimed he couldn't juggle school and raising a kid. I didn't know what to say back then. I was just a scared kid who'd lost his mom. But the way they avoided eye contact when they talked to me said it all. They weren't interested in taking on that responsibility. I was shuffled into the foster care system without much fanfare. Kevin signed some papers, patted me on the shoulder, and said he'd visit. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Foster care was a mixed bag. I ended up in a decent home eventually, but it took a while to get there. My first placement was with a family that saw me as a paycheck. They didn't hit me or anything, but they were distant. Meals were served on time, the fridge was stocked, but the house always felt cold. My foster parents didn't talk to me unless it was necessary, and they had 2 older kids who made it clear I wasn't part of their little family. I spent most of my time alone, sitting in my room with my mom's old photo album. It was one of the few things I'd managed to take with me. The phone calls started a couple of months after I was placed. At first, I was excited to hear from Kevin and David. I thought maybe they regretted their decision and would change their minds. But the calls were awkward. They'd ask generic questions. How's school? Are you eating enough? And then there'd be long pauses. They never really listened to my answers. After a while, I stopped looking forward to their calls. It felt like they were doing it out of obligation, not because they actually cared. One time, when I was 12, I got brave and asked Kevin why he didn't take me in. He sighed like I was being unreasonable and said, I was just starting my career, man. It wasn't the right time. David gave a similar excuse when I asked him. I had no idea how to raise a kid, he said. It wouldn't have been fair to either of us. At the time, I didn't know how to argue back, but their words stuck with me. It wasn't about fairness. It was about the fact that they didn't want me. As the years went by, I learned not to expect much from my family. Calls became less frequent, dropping from once a month to a couple of times a year. I stopped trying to engage with them and gave short answers to their questions. Yeah, school's fine. No, I don't need anything. Thanks for calling, I guess. Eventually, they stopped calling altogether, and I didn't care. By the time I was 15, I hated them. All of them. My brothers, my aunts, my uncles. They were all the same. They didn't care about me when it mattered, so why should I care about them? The foster family I ended up with when I was 14 was better, though. They weren't perfect, but they tried. My foster mom, Mrs. Clark, was patient, and Mr. Clark treated me like one of his own kids. They had 2 younger kids, and while we weren't super close, they didn't treat me like an outsider. For the first time in years, I felt like I had some kind of stability. I stayed with them until I turned 18, and I'm grateful for what they did for me. But even then, I couldn't shake the bitterness I felt toward my own family. Every holiday, every birthday, I'd wonder why no one had fought for me. Why didn't anyone think I was worth it? When I turned 20, I decided I was done. My brothers had tried reaching out a couple of times, but I ignored their calls. I didn't want their apologies or their excuses. I was tired of being the kid they abandoned. So, I packed my things, left town, and didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't even leave a note. I wanted a fresh start, a life where I wasn't defined by what my family did or didn't do. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I moved to a new city, got a job, and started building a life for myself. I didn't tell anyone my full story. When people asked about my family, I'd just say, "We're not close," and change the subject. It was easier that way. No one needed to know about the years I spent feeling like I wasn't enough. Looking back, I don't know if I'll ever forgive my brothers. Maybe they thought they were doing the right thing, or maybe they were just selfish. Either way, they made their choice, and I made mine. All I knew was that I wasn't going to let their neglect define me anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life, and that was enough for me. Starting over at 20 felt freeing but also terrifying. I packed everything I owned into a beat-up duffel bag and caught a bus to a city I'd only seen on TV. I didn't know anyone there, but that was the point. I wanted a clean slate, where no one knew me as the kid who got left behind. I didn't have much of a plan, just enough money to get by for a couple of weeks, and a vague idea that I'd figure things out as I went. The first few months were rough. I stayed in a cheap hostel while I looked for work, eating instant noodles most days and stretching every dollar. I'd pick up odd jobs, dishwashing, unloading trucks, cleaning offices, just to keep the lights on. I barely slept, partly because the hostel was noisy, but mostly because I couldn't stop thinking about whether I'd made the right choice. Was it stupid to cut ties with everyone and start from scratch? But every time I thought about reaching out to my brothers, I'd remember those awkward calls, the excuses, and the way they let me down when I needed them most. That was enough to keep me moving forward. Eventually, things started to click. I landed a job at a small coffee shop, the kind of place where the regulars knew your name and tipped in crumpled dollar bills. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and the owner, Mrs. Patel, took a liking to me. She reminded me a bit of Mrs. Clark, my last foster mom. Kind but no nonsense. She'd nag me about eating more vegetables and staying out of trouble, which I secretly appreciated. It had been a long time since anyone cared enough to do that. Working at the coffee shop gave me a sense of stability I hadn't felt in years. I started making friends with some of the regulars, like Alex, who ran the bookstore next door, and Lisa, a student who always came in with her nose in a textbook. For the first time in forever, I felt like I had a community. No one asked about my past, and I didn't offer any details. They just knew me as the guy who made a killer latte and always had a joke ready. It was enough. At 22, things got even better. That's when I met Sarah. She came into the coffee shop one rainy afternoon, soaked to the bone and looking like she'd had the worst day ever. Her umbrella had broken, and she was running late for a meeting, but she still stopped to order a chai latte. When I handed it to her, she smiled and said, "Thanks for not judging me for looking like a drowned rat." I laughed and said, "Hey, you're the best-dressed drowned rat I've seen all day." She rolled her eyes, but I could tell she was amused. Sarah started coming in more often after that, and before long, we were chatting every time she stopped by. She was 30, a little older than me, and worked as a graphic designer. She had this easy confidence about her, like she knew exactly who she was and didn't care what anyone else thought. It was refreshing, especially since I'd spent so much of my life feeling like I had to prove myself to people who didn't care anyway. After a few weeks, I worked up the nerve to ask her out. To my surprise, she said yes. Our first date was simple. We grabbed burgers from a food truck and walked around the park. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me about her childhood, growing up as an only child with parents who adored her, and how she'd always dreamed of traveling the world. I told her about working at the coffee shop, and my dream of one day opening my own place. I didn't tell her much about my family, though. I just said we weren't close and left it at that. Sarah didn't push for details, which I appreciated. She seemed to understand that I wasn't ready to talk about it, and she respected that. At least in the beginning, our relationship moved quickly. By the time we'd been dating a year, we were talking about moving in together. I'd saved up enough to get out of the hostel and into a tiny apartment, but Sarah's place was nicer, so I ended up moving in with her. It felt strange at first, living with someone who was so close to their family. Her parents would call every few days just to chat, and she'd tell them everything. What we'd had for dinner, what movies we'd watched, even small stuff like the new coffee shop we'd tried. I wasn't used to that kind of openness. My instinct was always to keep things to myself. Sarah was patient with me, though. She'd invite me to family dinners and holidays, and while I felt like an outsider at first, her parents went out of their way to make me feel welcome. Her dad was the kind of guy who could strike up a conversation with anyone, and her mom always made enough food to feed an army. It was nice, but it also made me feel a little off, like I was getting a glimpse of something I'd never had and probably never would. After a while, Sarah started bringing up the idea of reconnecting with my family. "Don't you think it would be nice to have them in your life again?" she asked one night as we were eating dinner. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "Not really," I said. She looked surprised. "But they're your family," she said, like that was supposed to mean something. I told her I didn't want to talk about it, and she dropped it. Or at least, I thought she did. Looking back, I think Sarah genuinely believed she was helping. She grew up in this tight-knit, supportive family, so I don't think she could understand why anyone would want to cut ties with their own blood. To her, family was everything. But to me, family was just a reminder of all the times I'd been let down. For a while, things were good. Sarah stopped bringing up my family, and I let myself believe she'd finally understood where I was coming from. We started talking about the future, marriage, kids, maybe even buying a house someday. It felt like we were building something solid, something I could rely on. For the first time, I thought maybe I'd finally found my happy ending. But as I'd soon learn, some things aren't as solid as they seem. It started with a text message. I didn't recognize the number, so I almost ignored it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The message said something like, "Hey, it's been a long time. I know this is out of the blue, but I'd really like to catch up." The name at the bottom stopped me cold. Kevin, my oldest brother. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake or spam. Kevin wouldn't reach out after all these years, right? But as I read the message again, it was clear he knew exactly who he was talking to. He mentioned a few things only my brother would know. Stuff about our mom and the neighborhood we grew up in. My stomach sank. How did he get my number? I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the room, and another part of me wanted to call him and scream. But in the end, I didn't do either. I just blocked the number. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Later that night, I brought it up to Sarah. "You won't believe who texted me today," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. She looked up from her laptop, curious. "Who?" "Kevin. My brother," I said. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of shock or concern, she gave me this weird, guilty look. "Oh," she said softly. "I was going to tell you about that." I froze. "Tell me about what?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I gave him your number," she admitted. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. "You what?" "I just thought," she started, but I cut her off. "You thought what? That I wouldn't notice? That it was okay to completely ignore everything I've told you about my family? I thought maybe if you talk to him, you'd realize it's not as bad as you think," she said, her voice defensive now. "You've been holding on to this anger for so long, and I just wanted to help you move past it." "Help me?" I snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You had no right." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I couldn't believe she'd gone behind my back like this, especially after all the times I'd told her how I felt about my family. I thought she understood. I thought she respected my boundaries. Clearly, I was wrong. She tried to explain herself, saying she only wanted to help and that she didn't mean any harm. But to me, it didn't matter what her intentions were. She crossed a line and I couldn't look past it. "I can't do this," I told her finally. "We're done." Her eyes widened. "You're breaking up with me? Over this?" "It's not just this," I said. "It's the fact that you don't respect me enough to listen. I told you how I felt, and you went behind my back anyway. I can't be with someone who thinks they know better than me about my own life." She started crying, which only made me angrier. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, let's talk about this. We can fix it." But I didn't want to talk anymore. I'd said everything I needed to say. "You need to move out," I told her. "Take as much time as you need, but I want you gone." She cried harder, begging me to reconsider, but my mind was made up. Trust is everything in a relationship, and once it's broken, there's no going back. At least not for me. The next few days were a blur. Sarah moved out of our apartment, taking her things one box at a time. I tried to avoid being there while she packed. It was too painful to watch, even though I knew I'd done the right thing. Her parents started calling me, which only made things worse. They left voicemail after voicemail, saying Sarah was heartbroken and didn't understand why I was being so harsh. They argued that she had good intentions and didn't deserve to be punished for one mistake. But it wasn't just one mistake. It was a betrayal of trust. And if they couldn't understand that, there was no point in trying to explain it. I blocked their numbers too. One night, about a week after Sarah moved out, I sat on the couch staring at the empty space where her bookshelf used to be. I felt this weird mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief. Part of me missed her, but another part of me was glad she was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that this breakup was inevitable, that sooner or later, her idea of family and mine were bound to clash. Looking back, I think Sarah genuinely believed she was helping me. She thought she was fixing something that was broken, but what she didn't understand is that some things don't need fixing. Some things are better left alone. I didn't need closure with my brothers. I didn't need to forgive them or have a heart-to-heart. All I needed was the peace that came from knowing I was in control of my own life. Sarah couldn't see that. And in the end, that's what drove us apart. After Sarah moved out, I thought things would settle down. I was wrong. If anything, the drama just ramped up. Sarah's parents kept trying to get involved. Even though I'd blocked their numbers, they found ways to get messages to me. One time, they showed up at the coffee shop while I was working. I had no idea they'd come until Mrs. Patel came to the back and told me, "There's a couple asking for you. They seem upset." My heart sank. I already knew who it was. When I walked out to the front, there they were, Sarah's mom and dad, looking like they'd just stepped off a suburban family postcard. Her mom had tears in her eyes, and her dad looked ready to give me a lecture. "We just want to talk," her dad said as soon as he saw me. I sighed. "I'm at work. This isn't the time or place." "Well, you haven't given us much of a choice," her mom said, her voice trembling. "You blocked our numbers, and Sarah is devastated. You won't even hear her out." "There's nothing to hear," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She broke my trust. End of story." Her dad stepped forward, clearly trying to intimidate me. "Do you know how much she's been crying? She made a mistake, but she didn't do it out of malice. She cares about you, and she was only trying to help." I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the frustration bubbling inside me. "Look," I said, "I'm sorry she's hurting, but that doesn't change what happened. I made my boundaries clear, and she ignored them. That's not something I can just get over." "But you're throwing away years of a relationship over one incident," her mom said, almost pleading now. "She's in therapy, you know. She's trying to understand why she did what she did. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It doesn't change what she did," I replied. "I need you to leave now. I'm not discussing this any further." Mrs. Patel must have sensed the tension, because she came out from the back and gently but firmly told them they needed to leave. I felt bad that she had to get involved, but I was grateful she had my back. As they left, her dad muttered something about me being cold and ungrateful. I just shook my head and went back to work. That wasn't the end of it, though. Sarah herself started sending me letters. At first, I ignored them. I didn't even open the first few, just tossed them in the trash. But one day, curiosity got the better of me, and I opened one. In the letter, she apologized again for what she'd done. She said she regretted crossing my boundaries and wished she could take it back. But she also doubled down on her reasoning, saying she still believed I needed to confront my past. "I just wanted you to have the chance to heal," she wrote. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was trying to help." Reading that letter made me angrier than I thought it would. It wasn't that she was apologizing. That part was fine. But the way she kept framing it as if she knew better than me about my own life, that made my blood boil. She didn't understand that her version of help was the exact opposite of what I needed. I didn't respond to her letters. I didn't see the point. It was clear we were never going to see eye to eye on this, and dragging it out would just make things worse. I focused on work, on rebuilding my routine without her. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when I'd think about texting her or calling her, just to see how she was doing. But I knew better. Once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to fix. Around this time, my brothers started trying to contact me more persistently. Blocking Kevin's number hadn't been enough. They found me on social media too. I'd deleted my accounts years ago, but apparently Kevin had gotten David involved, and David wasn't blocked yet. I got a message from him that just said, "We need to talk." I deleted it without replying, but the message lingered in my head for days. What did they want? Why now? I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's meddling had opened a door I'd worked hard to keep closed. It made me resent her all over again, even though I knew I was the one who had to deal with it now. Eventually, I decided to send David one last message. It was short and to the point. "I'm not interested in talking. Please stop contacting me." I blocked him immediately after sending it. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. One night, I was sitting in my apartment when I got a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I finally did, I was stunned to see Kevin standing there. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold. "I just want to talk," he said, holding his hands up like he was surrendering. "Can I come in?" "No," I said flatly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." He looked taken aback but nodded. "Look, I know you're mad at me and David. I get it. We should have done more when Mom died. We screwed up, but we've been trying to make it right, and you keep shutting us out." I crossed my arms. "You had 10 years to make it right. Why now?" He hesitated. "We didn't know how to reach you." And then Sarah reached out. She told us what happened, and it got us thinking. We just want a chance to fix things. Hearing him say her name felt like a punch to the gut. "Sarah had no right to get involved," I said through gritted teeth, and you have no right to show up here uninvited. I've made it clear I don't want to talk to you. Kevin's face fell, but I didn't care. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for everything. I miss my little brother. You should have thought about that before you abandoned him, I said. Then I shut the door in his face. That night, I couldn't sleep. Seeing Kevin brought back memories I'd tried to bury, memories of being a scared, lonely kid, wondering why no one wanted him. It reminded me why I'd cut ties in the first place. Some people don't deserve second chances. After Kevin showed up at my door, I knew I had to make some changes. Blocking numbers and ignoring messages wasn't enough anymore. My family had a way of creeping back in, no matter how clear I made it that I didn't want anything to do with them. It felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next message or knock at the door. I hated feeling that way, like I wasn't fully in control of my own life. The first thing I did was talk to my landlord. I explained the situation, leaving out some details, and asked if there was any way I could get out of my lease early. He wasn't thrilled, but after I offered to cover a month's rent as a penalty, he agreed. I started looking for a new place immediately, focusing on neighborhoods farther from where Kevin might think to look. Within a week, I found a small studio apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And most importantly, it was a fresh start. Packing up my old place was bittersweet. As much as I wanted to leave, this apartment had been my first real home after foster care. It was where I'd started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. It was where I met Sarah, where I'd thought for a while that I could finally have something stable. Leaving it felt like leaving behind a chapter of my life, one that had been both painful and hopeful in its own way. The move helped more than I expected. Being in a new place with new surroundings gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I threw myself into work, picking up extra shifts at the coffee shop and saving up for the future. Mrs. Patel noticed I was working harder than usual and pulled me aside one day. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just keeping busy." She didn't push, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. Still, her kindness meant a lot. It reminded me that not all relationships had to be complicated or painful. Some people just cared because they wanted to, no strings attached. Sarah, of course, didn't give up right away. Even after moving, I got a couple more letters from her, forwarded to my new address. I didn't bother opening them. I knew whatever she had to say wouldn't change anything. I'd made my decision, and I wasn't going to second guess it. I kept telling myself that trust was the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, there's no going back. It was hard, though. Some nights I'd lie awake thinking about the good times we'd had and wondering if I'd been too harsh. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. What she'd done wasn't just a mistake. It was a fundamental disregard for who I was and what I needed. As for my brothers, I didn't hear from them again after Kevin's visit. Whether they'd finally gotten the message or were just waiting for the right moment to try again, I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care. The more time passed, the more I realized how much lighter I felt without them in my life. I wasn't carrying around that anger and resentment anymore, not because I'd forgiven them, but because I'd finally accepted that I didn't need them. Their opinions, their guilt trips, their attempts to reconnect, none of it mattered. I was done letting them have power over me. One day, about 6 months after Sarah and I broke up, I got an email from an old friend I hadn't talked to in years. It was someone I'd met during my time in foster care, a guy named Marcus. He'd been a couple of years older than me, and we'd lost touch after he aged out of the system. Seeing his name in my inbox was a surprise, but a welcome one. In his email, Marcus said he'd recently moved to my city and was working as a mechanic. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime and catch up. I hesitated at first. Letting someone from my past back into my life felt risky, especially after everything that had happened. But Marcus wasn't like my brothers or Sarah. He knew what it was like to grow up without a safety net, to feel like you had to figure everything out on your own. So I replied and set up a time to meet. Seeing Marcus again was like stepping back into a world I'd almost forgotten. We talked for hours, sharing stories about our foster families, and laughing about the dumb stuff we used to do as kids. He told me about his struggles trying to find stable work after aging out and how he'd finally landed on his feet. I told him about my job at the coffee shop and my dream of one day opening my own place. At one point, Marcus leaned back in his chair and said, "You've done good for yourself, man. I'm proud of you." It caught me off guard. I wasn't used to hearing that from anyone, let alone someone who knew the darker parts of my past. But it meant a lot, more than I could put into words. Over the next few months, Marcus and I became close friends again. Having someone who understood my past, who didn't judge or try to fix me, was a game changer. He reminded me that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who show up for you when it counts. With Marcus's encouragement, I started thinking seriously about my future. I'd been saving up for years, and while I wasn't anywhere near ready to open my own coffee shop, the dream didn't feel as far off as it used to. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something real, something that was entirely mine. Looking back, cutting ties with Sarah and my brothers was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also one of the best. It taught me the importance of boundaries, of standing up for what I need and not letting anyone guilt me into compromising that. I don't regret the choices I made, even though they were painful. They brought me to where I am now, a place where I can finally start moving forward. As for my family, I wish them well, but I don't need them in my life. I've learned that some relationships aren't worth saving, and that's okay. Not every story needs a happy ending. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and focus on building the life you deserve. A week before our wedding, my fiancé told me his female best friend confessed she's in love with him. All right, so here's how things started going downhill in my marriage. And honestly, it's kind of crazy how everything seemed fine at first. I'm 27F, and I've been with my husband Matt, who's 30, for 3 years. We got married 5 months ago, and up until right before the wedding, I thought everything was perfect. We had no major issues or drama, just the usual stuff every couple deals with, like who's going to do the dishes or what to watch on Netflix. Nothing serious. Anyway, there's this woman, Sarah. She's been Matt's best friend since high school, and yeah, I knew about her from the beginning. He was always open about their friendship, and I didn't really see a problem with it at first. I mean, she had a long-term boyfriend, so it never crossed my mind that she could be a threat. I even met her a bunch of times, and we all hung out together pretty often. I honestly thought Sarah and I got along well. She was nice enough, I guess, and I didn't get any weird vibes from her. I figured she was just one of those people who has a close friendship with a guy, and it's totally platonic. But then, about a week before our wedding, things got real weird. It was a regular weeknight, and Matt and I were just chilling at home. I think we were talking about wedding plans or something, and then suddenly, Matt gets all serious. Like, he's got this look on his face, and I could tell something was bothering him. I asked him what was up, and he says, "We need to talk." You know that feeling when someone says that and your stomach just drops? Yeah, that's how I felt. I thought maybe he was having cold feet or something. So we sit down and he's like, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, and I don't want you to freak out." That's always a great way to start a conversation, right? My brain immediately goes into overdrive, thinking of all the worst case scenarios. But nothing could have prepared me for what he said next. He goes, "Sarah told me she's in love with me." I honestly thought I didn't hear him right. I was like, "Wait, what?" He repeated it, and I just sat there stunned. Like, what do you even say to that? My heart was racing, and I could feel my face getting hot. This woman, who I thought was just his friend, straight up told him she's in love with him. I didn't even know how to process it at first. Matt kept talking, explaining the whole situation while I sat there in shock. Apparently, Sarah had told him this just a few days ago. She said she couldn't keep it a secret anymore and that she had been in love with him for years. And get this, she had broken up with her boyfriend of 6 years because of her feelings for Matt. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could I have been so blind to this? I mean, we were literally about to get married and she drops this bomb on him. It was like something out of a bad movie. I started asking him a million questions like, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" And "What did you say to her?" Because, let's be real, I needed to know exactly how he handled this. The last thing I wanted was for him to have led her on in any way. Matt told me that he shut her down immediately, saying that he was in love with me and that he was going to marry me. End of story. He made it clear to her that nothing was going to happen between them. He even said he felt sorry for her, which kind of made me mad, honestly. Like, why would you feel sorry for someone who just tried to mess up your relationship? As he's telling me all this, I started getting this really weird feeling. Not jealousy exactly, but more like I'd been blindsided. Here I was, thinking I had nothing to worry about with Sarah, and the whole time she was secretly in love with my husband. It just felt wrong. I mean, how long had she been pretending to be my friend while she was really just waiting for her chance with Matt? I asked him what he planned to do about it, and he said that he thought we should cut her off completely. He didn't want to risk anything, and he didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I appreciated. But part of me couldn't help but wonder if he was really telling me everything. Like, was this really the first time she'd made a move on him, or had there been other moments I didn't know about? We decided to uninvite her from the wedding. I mean, there was no way I was going to have her there after what she did. It was awkward because some of our friends knew her and would probably ask questions, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her ruin our big day. Matt sent her a message letting her know that it was best if she didn't come, and that was that. Or so I thought. The days leading up to the wedding were kind of tense. I kept replaying the whole thing in my head, trying to figure out if I missed any signs or if Matt had ever said or done anything that could have encouraged her. But every time I brought it up, he reassured me that nothing had ever happened between them and that he only saw her as a friend. I wanted to believe him, and for the most part, I did. But there was still this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that wouldn't go away. I tried to focus on the wedding, though, and for the most part, it went off without a hitch. Sarah was out of the picture, and everything seemed fine again. We got married, went on our honeymoon, and life started to feel normal. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd really heard the last of her. Looking back, maybe I should have pushed harder to figure out what was really going on. But at the time, I just wanted to move on and put the whole thing behind us. Little did I know things were far from over. A few months later, and everything seemed fine again. Normal married life, work, weekends together, stuff like that. Honestly, I thought the whole Sarah situation was behind us. I mean, we uninvited her to the wedding and we hadn't heard from her since, so I figured we'd moved on. Then, Matt's birthday came around. He didn't want anything too crazy, just a dinner with family and some close friends. Nothing big, just a chill evening at this restaurant we like. I was totally on board with that. We invited about 10 people, some of his family, a couple of our mutual friends, and it was supposed to be this nice, low-key birthday thing. The dinner started off pretty great. Everyone was having a good time, and the mood was light. I remember sitting there, looking at Matt, thinking how glad I was that we were past all the wedding drama. We're all eating, laughing, talking, you know how it goes, when out of nowhere, someone walks into the restaurant. And who is it? Sarah. Yeah, Sarah. The same Sarah who we'd cut off months ago. At first, I didn't even notice her. We were deep into some conversation about one of our friends' new job, and I was kind of zoned out, just enjoying the night. But then I hear this voice say, "Oh, hey, I didn't mean to intrude. I was just grabbing dinner alone and saw you guys here." And I swear my stomach dropped. I look up, and there she is, standing at our table like it's no big deal. I didn't know what to do, I just froze. Matt looked surprised too, but not in the way I expected. He wasn't, shocked or annoyed. He actually smiled at her, like he was happy to see her or something, and that really threw me off. Sarah stood there, acting all innocent, like she just happened to be in the same restaurant on Matt's birthday. What are the chances, right? She wished Matt a happy birthday, and I'm sitting there, waiting for him to say, "Thanks, but we're kind of in the middle of a family dinner." Like a normal person would do in that situation. But no. Instead, he looks at her and says, "Why don't you join us?" And I'm just sitting there, staring at him like, "Are you serious right now?" I couldn't believe it. This was the same woman who told him she was in love with him, who tried to get him to call off our wedding, and now he's inviting her to sit with us? I didn't even know what to say. I was too stunned to react at first. I glanced around the table, and no one else seemed to think it was weird. I mean, they all knew Sarah, but they didn't know the whole story, so maybe they just thought she was still a friend of ours. But I wasn't about to let this happen. I wasn't going to sit there and play nice while this woman, who had tried to sabotage my relationship, joined us for dinner like nothing had ever happened. So I stood up and I said, "You know what? You can have my seat." I didn't even look at Sarah when I said it. I just pushed my chair back and walked out of the restaurant. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I left, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to sit there and pretend everything was fine. My heart was racing as I walked outside, and I immediately texted a ride home. I figured Matt would follow me, maybe come after me to see if I was okay. I mean, I had just walked out of his birthday dinner, right? You'd think he'd be concerned or at least curious about why I left. But nope. I waited outside for a few minutes, half expecting him to come running after me, but he never did. So I got in the car and went home. I was fuming the whole ride back, replaying everything in my head. The way Sarah had just happened to show up at the restaurant, how Matt had invited her to join us without even thinking about how I would feel. It was like he didn't care at all. By the time I got home, I was still in shock, but mostly I was angry. Angry at Matt for being so oblivious, and angry at myself for not seeing this coming. Hours passed, and Matt still hadn't come home. I thought maybe he'd send me a text, check if I was all right, or apologize for what happened. But no, nothing. It was like he didn't even care that I just walked out of his birthday dinner. Finally, almost 2 hours later, the door opens and he walks in. The first thing out of his mouth, not, "Are you okay?" or "I'm sorry." No, he walks in and immediately starts arguing with me. He says I overreacted and acted immaturely by leaving. He actually had the nerve to say I ruined his birthday. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him why he invited Sarah to join us after everything that had happened. I thought we were on the same page about cutting her off, but apparently I was wrong. He looked at me like I was crazy and said, I was just being nice. It's been a long time since I saw her, and I didn't think she still had feelings for me. Didn't think she still had feelings for him? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he be so clueless? This woman literally broke up with her boyfriend to try to get with him, and he just assumes she's over it because some time has passed. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I told him that it didn't matter whether she still had feelings or not. The fact that he had invited her to join us, knowing what she had tried to do, was disrespectful to me. But he just kept saying that I was the one who made a big deal out of nothing, that I should have just stayed and been civil. Civil? With her? I was furious. He didn't get it. He didn't understand how hurt and disrespected I felt, and to be honest, I don't know if he ever will. That night, we barely spoke. He went to bed and I stayed up, just sitting there, trying to figure out where we go from here. Alright, so here's where things started going downhill fast. After that whole mess at the restaurant, things between Matt and me were tense, to say the least. We barely talked after that night, and when we did, it was mostly awkward. I tried to just move past it, but honestly, it was hard. I couldn't stop thinking about how he had invited Sarah to join us, and the way he acted like I was the one making a big deal out of it. But I figured, okay, maybe this is just something we need to talk through. We had one argument, it was heated, and now we needed to sit down and really get on the same page. So a few days later, I tried to bring it up again, just to clear the air and talk about why it bothered me so much. I wasn't trying to start another fight, just wanted to explain where I was coming from and why I reacted the way I did. We're sitting on the couch, and I start by telling him that I still feel hurt by what happened. I explained that it wasn't just about Sarah showing up. It was about how he handled the whole situation. I needed him to understand that for me, it felt like a betrayal. Not just because of Sarah's history with him, but because he didn't even think about how I'd feel inviting her to sit down with us. I told him that I felt disrespected, like my feelings didn't matter in that moment. Matt just sat there nodding, but he didn't really say anything. He didn't even look that bothered by what I was saying. When I finished, he just kind of shrugged and said, I don't know why you're still holding on to this. I already told you. I didn't think it was a big deal. That's when I started getting frustrated again. I was trying to be calm and explain my side, but it felt like he wasn't taking me seriously. So I asked him straight up, do you really not see why this upset me? Do you really think this is no big deal? And what he said next, it was like a punch to the gut. He goes, honestly, I think you're overreacting. It was one dinner. I just wanted to be polite, and you made it into this huge thing. Sarah's not some villain. She was a friend, and she doesn't even have feelings for me anymore. Now, at that point, I'm fuming. I told him, you don't know that? You don't know that she's over you. She literally broke up with her boyfriend because of you. How can you be so sure? Matt sighed, and I could tell he was getting annoyed, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let him brush this off. So I kept pushing, telling him that he should have never invited her in the first place, and that, honestly, I was starting to feel like maybe he didn't cut her off as much as he said he did. Like, why was he so quick to act like everything was fine between them? That's when he dropped something on me that I wasn't expecting. He goes, well, yeah, we haven't talked much, but we did text a few times after the wedding. It wasn't a big deal. She just wanted to check in and make sure things were good between us. I swear I felt like I'd been slapped. What do you mean you've been texting her? I asked. I thought we agreed to cut her off. Why would you keep talking to her after everything she did? Matt acted like it wasn't a big deal. He said, I didn't want there to be any bad blood, that's all. It's not like we're best friends again. It was just a few texts, nothing serious. But to me, it was serious. It was very serious. Because it wasn't just about the texts. It was about the fact that he had been hiding it from me. I thought we were on the same page, that we had both agreed to keep Sarah out of our lives. But now I was finding out that Matt had still been in contact with her, behind my back. I asked him, why didn't you tell me? If it was no big deal, why didn't you say anything about texting her? And of course, he didn't have a good answer for that. He just kind of shrugged again and said, I didn't think it was worth mentioning. I didn't want to upset you. Well, mission not accomplished, because now I was more upset than ever. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about trust. If he could keep something like that from me, what else was he hiding? How was I supposed to trust him when he clearly didn't think it was important to tell me the truth? We ended up arguing for the rest of the night, and by the end of it, I was exhausted. I felt like I was banging my head against a wall, trying to get him to understand why this hurt so much. But he just wasn't getting it. To him, it was all just a misunderstanding. He kept saying that I was blowing things out of proportion, that I was making something out of nothing. But to me, it wasn't nothing. It was the fact that he had been dishonest with me, that he had gone behind my back and done exactly what we agreed not to do. I couldn't even look at him after that. I went to bed early, just to get away from him, and I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got here. How did we go from being this happy, problem-free couple to this? It was like everything I thought I knew about our relationship had changed, and I didn't know how to deal with it. The next morning, things were awkward. We barely talked, and when we did, it was short and cold. I could feel this huge wall between us, and I didn't know how to break it down. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to at that point. All I knew was that the trust I had in Matt was shaken, and I didn't know how to fix it. And the worst part? Matt still didn't seem to understand why I was so upset. He kept acting like this was all just some big misunderstanding that I should get over, but I couldn't. I couldn't just get over it, because to me, it wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about our relationship and whether I could really trust him going forward. Update 1. Alright, so after everything with the texting and all that, things between me and Matt just kept getting worse. It was like every day I was walking on eggshells around him. We barely spoke unless we had to. And even then, it felt forced. You know that feeling when you're around someone and it's just awkward? Yeah, that was us. I didn't know how to fix it, and honestly, I didn't know if I wanted to. Part of me was so angry that I didn't even want to deal with him anymore. But at the same time, we were married, right? We'd made these vows, and I felt like I had to at least try to make it work. So after a few days of just avoiding each other, I decided to talk to him again. I figured we couldn't keep going like this forever. I sat him down one night, and I tried to be as calm as possible. I didn't want it to turn into another argument. I just wanted to talk, like two adults. I told him, look, we need to figure this out. We can't keep living like this, barely talking to each other. I feel like there's a wall between us, and I don't know how to break it down. He didn't say much at first, just nodded and looked at the floor. So I kept going, telling him that we needed to rebuild trust if we were going to make this work. I told him how hurt I still was by everything that had happened, and how the whole texting thing made it even worse. I said, I just need to know that you're being honest with me, and right now, I don't feel that way. And finally, he looked up at me and said, I get it, I do. But I swear, there's nothing going on with Sarah. I haven't talked to her since that last time. I've been trying to give you space, but it feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough. That actually surprised me a bit. I hadn't really thought about how he was feeling in all this. I mean, yeah, I was mad and hurt, but I guess I didn't consider that he might be feeling lost too. So I softened up a bit and said, I'm not trying to push you away. I don't know how to trust you right now. You hid the texting from me, and it made me feel like there could be more. Matt sighed and said, I know I messed up by not telling you about the texts. I didn't think it would matter because in my mind, Sarah was out of the picture. I never thought it would blow up like this. I'm sorry for not being honest with you, but I'm telling you now, there's nothing else. I don't know what else I can say to prove that. I sat there for a second, just letting it sink in. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something still felt off. I didn't know if it was just me being paranoid or if there was really something he wasn't telling me. But I figured if we were going to move forward, I had to at least give him the benefit of the doubt. So I told him, okay, I'm willing to try to move past this, but you have to be honest with me from now on. No more hiding things, even if you think it's small. We have to be on the same page. He agreed. And for a minute, it felt like maybe we were making progress. I wasn't totally convinced that things were going to be fine, but it was at least a step in the right direction. But here's where it gets complicated again. A few days after that conversation, I was still feeling a little uneasy about the whole Sarah thing. I didn't want to keep bringing it up with Matt, so I decided to do something that, looking back, I probably shouldn't have. I went through his phone. Now, before you judge me, I know it's not the best move, but I needed to know for sure that he wasn't hiding anything else from me. He'd already lied about texting her before, so how was I supposed to just take his word for it now? I felt like I had no choice. No. So, when he was in the shower, I grabbed his phone and started scrolling through his messages. At first, I didn't see anything suspicious. It was mostly texts with his family and a few friends. But then I opened his Instagram DMs, and that's where I saw it. A message from Sarah. It wasn't anything crazy, just her asking how he was doing and if he wanted to grab coffee sometime. But the date on the message? It was from after our last fight, after he promised he wasn't talking to her anymore. And the worst part? He had responded. He didn't say much, just something like, I'm good, just busy with work. But that was enough for me. He'd lied again. He was still talking to her, and he didn't even bother to tell me. I couldn't believe it. After everything we'd been through, after all the promises he made, he was still talking to her behind my back. I didn't know what to do. I felt this wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. I just stood there staring at his phone, not even sure how to react. Should I confront him right away? Should I wait and see if he mentions it himself? My mind was racing, and I felt like I was about to explode. When he came out of the shower, I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there, trying to keep my cool. But I couldn't hold it in for long. I turned to him and said, "So when were you going to tell me that Sarah messaged you again?" His face went pale. He knew he was caught. He tried to stammer out some excuse, but I wasn't having it. I threw his phone at him and said, "I saw the messages. You told me you weren't talking to her anymore. You lied to me again." He tried to defend himself, saying it was just one message and that he didn't even plan on meeting up with her. But I didn't care. The fact that he hid it from me again was all I needed to know. I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't even want to look at him. How could he keep doing this? How could he keep betraying my trust over and over again? That night I slept in the guest room, and for the first time since we got married, I wasn't sure if we were going to make it. Update 2. So, after that whole thing with the Instagram messages, I was done. Like, mentally done. I didn't know what to believe anymore, and I honestly didn't even want to deal with Matt at that point. We didn't talk for a couple of days after that blow-up. I was staying in the guest room and he was in the bedroom, and it was like we were two strangers living in the same house. It was awkward, but honestly, I didn't care. I needed space to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I knew we couldn't just keep living like this, but I didn't know if I was ready to make any big decisions yet. Part of me was still hoping Matt would come to his senses, admit that he messed up again, and actually try to fix things. But every time I thought about those messages, I just got angrier. It wasn't about Sarah anymore. It was about the lying, the constant sneaking around, the hiding stuff from me. How was I supposed to stay in a marriage where I couldn't even trust my husband? Anyway, a few days after the fight, Matt finally came to me and said we needed to talk. I'd been waiting for this, but I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I sat down on the couch and he sat across from me, looking like he didn't even know where to start. We were both quiet for a minute, and then he finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I've been screwing up. I didn't think the messages were a big deal, but clearly they were to you. I should have told you." I wanted to believe he was being genuine, but at this point, words didn't mean much to me. He'd apologized before and then gone right back to doing the same thing. So I asked him, "Why didn't you tell me? If it wasn't a big deal, why not just be upfront about it? You knew how I felt about you talking to her." He paused for a second, like he was trying to come up with the right thing to say, but I could see he was struggling. Finally, he said, "I didn't want to upset you again. I thought if I just didn't mention it, we could avoid another fight." That's when I lost it. I stood up and said, "That's exactly the problem, Matt. You're trying to avoid fights by hiding things from me, but that just makes everything worse. If you had just told me about the messages, maybe I would have been upset for a minute, but at least I wouldn't feel like you're constantly lying to me. I can't trust you when you keep doing this." He looked shocked, like he didn't realize how deep the issue really went for me. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he thought this was all just about Sarah, but it wasn't. It was about trust. It was about the fact that I couldn't count on him to be honest with me. And for a marriage, that's pretty much the most important thing, right? Without trust, what do you even have? We went back and forth for a while, him apologizing and me telling him it wasn't enough. I wasn't yelling or anything, but I was just laying it all out there. I told him I didn't know if I could keep doing this, that I needed to feel like he actually cared about fixing things, not just saying sorry and moving on. Matt kept saying he was sorry and that he didn't want to lose me, but at the same time, I didn't feel like he was really getting it. It was like he thought saying sorry would make everything magically go back to normal. But for me, it wasn't that easy. Things weren't just going to be okay because he apologized. There was damage done, and I didn't know if we could fix it. After a while, I just sat back down and said, "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Matt. I love you, but I can't keep living like this. I can't keep wondering if you're hiding something from me. It's exhausting." He didn't say anything for a minute, and I could see the gears turning in his head. I think he finally started to realize how serious I was. I wasn't just mad, I was on the edge of being done. He reached out for my hand, but I pulled away. Not to be mean, but because I wasn't ready to just forgive him yet. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this," he said. "I know I've been messing up, but I don't want to lose you. I'll stop talking to Sarah for good. I'll do anything. I just want us to be okay." It was weird because part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this time, he was serious. But the other part of me was tired. Tired of the lies, the drama, the constant feeling of betrayal. I didn't know if I had it in me to keep fighting for this marriage when I was the only one who seemed to care about the trust part. I told him, I don't know if that's enough. It's not just about Sarah, Matt. It's about the fact that you didn't think it was important to be honest with me, and I don't know how we fix that. He tried to argue that he'd been honest most of the time, and that he didn't mean to hurt me, but honestly, I wasn't in the mood to hear excuses anymore. I told him, it's not about what you meant to do, it's about what you did. You lied to me, and you kept lying even when you knew it hurt me. How am I supposed to trust you after that? We sat there in silence for a while after that. Neither of us knew what to say. I think we were both just trying to process everything. Eventually, I got up and said, I need some time to think. I don't know if I can forgive this right now. He didn't try to stop me. He just nodded and said, take whatever time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. I walked out of the room and went back to the guest room where I'd been staying. I sat on the bed and just stared at the wall, thinking about everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to believe we could fix this, that we could get back to where we were before all the lies. But another part of me wasn't so sure. I didn't know if I could ever fully trust Matt again. And honestly, without trust, what's the point?
Walking into Elite Couture, Tasha felt the weight of countless eyes following her every move. As a senior White House advisor, she'd grown accustomed to scrutiny, but something about this upscale boutique made her shoulders tense. Her fingers brushed against silk and chiffon as she searched for the perfect dress for next week's diplomatic summit. The security guard's gaze burned into her back. Bradley, his name tag declared, hadn't stopped watching since she'd entered. Even as other customers breezed through the aisles unbothered, his attention remained fixed, his judgment clear in every lingering look. Here at New Real Life Stories, we uncover moments when prejudice collides with power, and today's tale reveals how a simple shopping trip transformed into a confrontation that would shake a city's fashion establishment to its core. As Tasha stepped into the fitting room, neither she nor Bradley could have predicted how the next 10 minutes would dramatically alter both their lives forever. Tasha glided between the racks of designer gowns, her fingertips trailing across beaded silk and smooth velvet. Each piece she selected represented more than just fabric. They were armor for the diplomatic battles ahead. A lifetime of breaking barriers had taught her the importance of presentation, yet with every careful choice, Bradley's presence loomed larger, his footsteps echoing her own like an unwanted shadow. The emerald silk would suit you perfectly, a sales associate offered warmly, holding up a stunning gown that caught the afternoon light. But Bradley's scowl cut through the moment, his radio crackling unnecessarily loud in the hushed boutique. The associate's smile faltered, her eyes darting between them before she quietly retreated. Tasha squared her shoulders, refusing to let his surveillance diminish her dignity. She'd navigated countless high-stakes negotiations, she wouldn't let this man's prejudice derail her afternoon. The fitting room mirror reflected more than her image. It captured the weight of expectations she'd carried throughout her career. Every promotion, every achievement had come with scrutiny that her white colleagues never faced. As she slipped into a midnight blue sheath dress, voices drifted through the curtain. Watch that one carefully, Bradley muttered to another guard. Something's not right about her. Been here too long, looking at the expensive stuff. Tasha's hands trembled as she buttoned the dress, but her resolve hardened. The familiar heat of indignation rose in her chest. She'd faced discrimination before, turned it into fuel for change. The bathroom mirror would have to do for this final fitting. She gathered her selections, including a cream blouse she'd been admiring, and made her way across the store. Yet even this simple decision sparked Bradley's suspicion. "Ma'am, stop right there." His command cut through the store's ambient music like a knife. Other shoppers froze, their expressions a familiar mix of discomfort and feigned ignorance. Some quickly busied themselves with their phones, while others simply turned away. "I need to check your belongings. Store policy for suspicious behavior." "On what grounds?" Tasha's voice remained steady, years of diplomatic training evident in her controlled response. She'd learned early in her career that displaying anger would only reinforce their prejudices. "I'm simply shopping, like everyone else here." Bradley's face tightened, his jaw clenching at her composed defiance. "We've been watching you. Taking items into the bathroom isn't normal shopping behavior." His hand moved toward her arm, but Tasha stepped back, maintaining the invisible barrier between them. "Don't touch me," she warned, her tone carrying the authority of countless White House briefings. "Your assumptions about what constitutes normal behavior are exactly the problem here." But Bradley's next move shattered all pretense of professionalism. His fingers gripped her blazer, attempting to forcibly remove it. "Standard procedure," he growled, but his actions screamed of something far more sinister. The expensive fabric strained under his grip as Tasha stood her ground, her heart pounding but her exterior remaining calm. "Remove your hands immediately," she commanded, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. Other customers finally began to murmur, phones recording the escalating scene. A young woman stepped forward, then hesitated, caught between the desire to help and the fear of involvement. The store manager emerged from his office, his face draining of color as he assessed the situation. "Bradley, what are you doing?" His intervention came too late, the damage was done. But Tasha wasn't finished. She reached for her phone, her hands steady now. The text from her assistant confirmed what she already knew: her Secret Service detail waited outside. The boutique's doors swung open, revealing a team of agents in impeccable suits. The sharp clicks of their shoes against the marble floor echoed through the now silent store. Bradley's face contorted as realization dawned: he'd just attempted to strip search a senior White House official. The manager stammered apologies, but Tasha raised her hand for silence. "This isn't about me," she declared, her voice carrying across the hushed space. "This is about every person who's been profiled, humiliated, and denied their dignity in spaces like this. Every woman who's been made to feel she doesn't belong, every shopper who's been followed, every customer who's had their presence questioned. Change doesn't come from above, it comes from moments like these, when we refuse to let prejudice go unchallenged." The story spread like wildfire across social media. Elite Couture's corporate office launched an immediate investigation, uncovering a pattern of discriminatory behavior that extended beyond Bradley. Security footage revealed selective enforcement, with minority customers receiving disproportionate scrutiny. Bradley's termination came swiftly, but Tasha ensured it wasn't the end. She leveraged her position to push for mandatory bias training across the retail industry, working with civil rights organizations to develop comprehensive guidelines for security personnel. The incident became a case study in retail discrimination, discussed in boardrooms and training sessions nationwide. What began as one woman's humiliation transformed into a movement for systemic change. In the weeks that followed, Tasha returned to the boutique. Different security guards nodded respectfully as she entered, their training evident in their professional demeanor. The emerald silk dress still hung on display, but now it represented something more, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statements come not from the clothes we wear, but from the dignity with which we wear them. As she browsed the racks, a young black woman approached her, speaking softly. "I saw the video," she whispered. "Thank you for standing up. It happens so often, but no one ever believes us." Tasha squeezed her hand, remembering every slight, every suspicious glance, every moment of wrongful accusation she'd experienced throughout her life. "Change happens one moment at a time," Tasha replied, her voice firm with conviction. "We just have to be brave enough to seize those moments when they come." 6 months after that fateful afternoon at Elite Couture, Tasha stood at a podium, addressing retail executives from across the nation. The emerald silk dress she wore, yes, that same dress, sparkled under the conference lights as she shared her story. But this time, she wasn't just speaking about one incident. She was championing a new era of inclusive shopping experiences, with over 50 major retailers adopting her proposed training programs. As she left the stage, a young security officer approached her. "Your experience changed how I do my job," she admitted. "Now I question my assumptions before I question our customers." That's the power of standing up for what's right. It creates ripples that touch countless lives. One person's courage can transform an entire industry, turning moments of injustice into catalysts for change. If this story moved you, help us reach more hearts and minds. Join our Real Life Stories new family on the journey to 10,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment telling us about a time you stood up for what's right. Together, we're not just sharing stories, we're changing lives, one video at a time.